is Keyed In with Max and Brent, unlocking the minds of the industry's top real estate professionals. And now, here are your hosts, Max Rabin and Brent Jackson.
Hi everyone, this is Jamie Manning, and I am back on the Keyed In podcast. And today we have a really special episode, and this is something that me, Max, and Brent have kind of been dreaming up, where we wanted to bring on real buyers in DC to talk about their experience and help sort of demystify the buying process a little bit. So today my guest is Allison Prell, and she is a recent buyer in DC. And what I think is really interesting about her story is that she just bought like a few weeks ago. And I know that there's a lot of trepidation and nervousness around buying right now with the shift in the market. So I think it's going to be really interesting to hear her story and what it's like to buy in DC at this exact moment. So thanks for being on, Allison.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This is super exciting.
It is.
I appreciate you being a guinea pig for all of this.
Happy to be so, yeah.
Yeah, because I kind of put out a casting call on ExposedBrick, just being like, is there anybody that's willing to talk to me about their experience? And I got a lot of messages saying people were willing, which is great. But like I said, what really drew me to your story is the fact that you bought like just now.
Yes, it's very fresh.
Yes, so
Yeah.
I commend you for that. But before we kind of get into the process, do you want to share a little bit about how long you've been in DC, what you do here, kind of your story, what brought you here?
Yeah, so I moved to DC in 2015. I grew up in the Virginia suburbs, just right outside. So my parents, my brother's family, right, we're all very close to each other. But I moved to DC as a kid. Growing up in the suburbs, we drive into the city for, the Kennedy Center and like fun, cool city experiences. And the first time we drove in, my parents love to tell this story. The first time we drove in, I'm sitting in the back seat and they hear this little voice that just goes, "Oh, the beautiful city."
Oh.
And I think that was the moment that I fell in love with DC. And, graduating college, knew I needed to come back here. I wanted to live here. And the job that I have isn't necessarily tethered to this specific city, this location. But I just love DC so much and think of it as my home that I can't imagine living anywhere else.
That's so great. Okay,
Yeah.
so you've been in DC since 2015?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So coming up on close to 10 years.
Yeah, I was going to let you do that math.
Yeah, right. I know. And so I've heard this before, that if you've been in DC for 10 years plus, then you can call yourself a Washingtonian. Have you heard that?
I have, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're getting very close. But now that you've bought a place here,
Yeah.
you're really putting down roots.
Really put that stake in the ground. Yeah.
Right. So remind me when you closed and when you moved.
I closed October 10th.
Okay.
And I moved October 28th.
Okay.
Probably would have moved sooner, but I already had like plane tickets to visit a girlfriend, right? It was all before I even knew what I was getting myself into with this process.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay.
And here we are.
Okay.
Yeah.
So so very, very fresh.
Yes.
And is it safe to assume that you've been thinking about buying for a long time, or was this more spur of the moment?
Yeah. I've been thinking about buying for a long time, in the sense that, probably since I was a little girl, hooked on HGTV.
Mm-hmm.
I always dreamed of having a place that I could kind of use as my own kind of canvas, if you will. And so it was just about being financially ready and emotionally ready. I think that's a big component as well. It's the biggest financial purchase you make in your life. Mm-hmm. And so I really wanted to make sure that I was committed, not just to the city, but also to the life that comes with that as well.
Yes. Yeah. No, and I think that that's a very good way to put it, that it does kind of fall into the two buckets of finance and emotional. And sometimes those things feel very intertwined as well.
Yeah.
So from an emotional standpoint, what were sort of the feelings that you had leading up to making the decision? What made you feel ready?
Yeah. So I think we can all agree DC is a pretty transient city.
Yes.
Right. And, there's even, first-time home buyer programs to help incentivize people to stay. I'm not an expert on those, so I won't talk
Nor
about
am
those.
I.
Yeah. But for this emotional aspect, every time I had a close friend, a loved one, share the exciting news that there's an opportunity that's taking them away from the city, they're moving away. I'd always get this ping like, oh, I could do that too. Oh, I could pack up and, I'm renting. I can pack up and leave at any moment, start a new life somewhere else. And it wasn't until most recently that, I had another friend, I'm off on a new adventure, very excited for them, that I felt the absence of that ping. And it was more so this sense of security that that's okay. I'll visit them. They'll visit me. This is my home. And that's when I knew I was ready emotionally. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, because I think that there are a lot of people that come to DC knowing they're just going to be here for a short period of time for their career. And there are some people that come here and do think they're going to be here a short period of time, but then end up staying a long time. And it really like sneaks up on you. And that's definitely what happened to me, where I was like, oh, I'm going to live here for a couple of years. I don't know. And fast forward, I've been here, I don't know, like 15 years or something at this point.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah. Been here a long time. And my husband and I always talk about, we're like, oh, where should we go? We should go somewhere. Like, it seems like people are leaving. Where should we go? And we can never think of a place we'd rather be.
Yeah.
And so I think turning that corner and realizing that this has become your home, and not having that FOMO of, oh, I could go anywhere. I think that is a very good indicator that you're ready to put down some roots.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Financially, that's the tough one, because this market is so insane.
Yeah.
So what sort of things did you do to prepare financially to make the largest purchase of your life?
Yeah. So I've been saving up for quite some time. And you hear all about, 20% down, 20% down. It's not a requirement to have 20% down. And so it's something that I knew about, but I also needed to accept, because without 20% down, you get PMI, right? And so that was one component of it. And the other aspect was almost kind of coming out to my family.
Yes.
Because I'm very much, I want to do this by myself. Like, I can do it on my own, blah, blah, blah. No one that's buying right now, perhaps unless you come from a very privileged background, which, applaud you. No one that's buying right now is buying completely on their own. Everyone that I've talked to has gotten help, gift, if you will, from their parents. And that ended up being part of my situation as well.
I think that is so important to point that out, because I think that going around seeing people your age that have bought something and you feel like a failure.
Yes.
Because you're like, why can I not figure this out? Like, it seems like everyone I know has figured this out but me.
I can do so much for myself. Why can't I do this?
Right, right. So demystifying that and realizing that if you are fortunate enough to have somebody that can help you financially, that's just kind of part of the game at this point.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
For sure.
But it made a huge difference for you.
It did. And, it gave me the flexibility to be able to really look and consider homes that I might not otherwise have been a strong candidate for, which really opened the doors for me.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you were able to get some help from your family, but you were still paying PMI though, correct?
Oh, 100%. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. For the next 8-ish years.
Yeah. And so for those that don't know, the PMI it stands for private mortgage insurance. And so basically, if you don't put the full 20% down, then you have to pay this annoying little monthly sort of guaranteed fee until you reach that 20%.
Yes.
So once you reach that threshold, then that PMI will drop off.
And I don't know if I can say this.
We can edit it out.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. So a tip and trick that I learned in this process was, if you're someone that has PMI and you keep up with your mortgage payments, keeping an eye on your property value and other similar homes, because if that property value increases substantially over the next couple of years, I could go back to my lender and say, hey, can we waive the remaining PMI, just this little bit or so, right? These payments for the next couple of years, and potentially end the PMI payments earlier, right? Which could save hundreds in the long run.
Based on the value of your property going up.
Exactly.
Oh, interesting.
And the fact that I am consistent with payments. And so I don't know if my lender's listening right now, but that's in the back of my mind, something to revisit in a couple years once, a little bit more established. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think people are always looking for those loopholes.
Yes.
And there are a lot of loopholes out there. There are a lot of loopholes. There are a lot of programs that people, they just don't know about. And once they find out about these things, it makes buying a little less intimidating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
So there was the emotional sort of turn point for you. Financially, you had saved for a long time to be able to get to where you are. And you're in a condo, correct?
I am in a condo.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
So you were able to figure out the finances. And then once you felt comfortable in both those realms, then the process began.
Yeah.
So start to finish, when you first started looking till the day you closed, like how long was that period?
Yeah. So I think, and connected to the financial piece as well, like I think there's also this important element of figuring out which of the two camps you fall into, right? Camp number one is you want to put as much you can up front to get your monthly as low as possible. That's camp one. Camp two is you're paying what you can to secure the property. It's not maybe as much as you probably could. And your monthly will be what it is, which would probably be higher compared to camp one. I fell into camp one.
Okay.
I was like, let's throw everything at this in the kitchen sink. I want my monthly as low as possible. Right. And so figuring out where I fell in that was important to then make those decisions for the rest of that process. Right. I'm sorry, can you remind me your question?
Yeah. Well, no, but I think you made a really good point. I think that, like, was there a lot of anxiety about the fact that, like, the bulk of your savings?
Oh my God, constant anxiety.
Yeah. Where you're like, okay, I've saved for years. And now I'm going to move this pile of money. And you have to think of it that way, I think, too. Like, you're just moving the money. It's not like you're spending it. It's like you're investing it just
my money is
else.
Invested in a box in the sky. Like that is,
Exactly. It's like the Carrie Bradshaw thing where she's 100%. Like, I like to see my money, or what did she say? I like to be able to see my money. And then it's like all of her shoes. But yeah, so I think that psychologically, that's like a huge jump to make to say everything that I've worked for, everything that I've saved for is going into this asset.
Yes.
So that's scary. So I commend you for doing that. Yeah.
Thank you.
But so the process, the length. So when did you say, maybe did you first casually just start, scrolling Zillow or ExposedBrickDC?
Of course.
So was there sort of an exploratory phase before you even engaged with a lender?
Yeah, great question.
Yeah. Or a realtor, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've all been guilty of those late night Zillow scrolls.
Yes.
We can't help it.
Yeah.
And ExposedBrickDC has just such a great curated list of rentals, buying properties. So of course, I've been doing that for several months, and it wasn't until I go to this gym, and I knew that there's another member that goes to the gym as well. That she's not a realtor per se, but she's involved in the process.
Okay.
And she's helped a lot of other members of the gym. So I, was loudly like, oh yeah, I'm thinking about buying, makes eye contact across the way. Right. And so she helped connect me to Blake Hardesty, who was my buying agent with the Oracle Group with Compass.
Nice.
Fell in love. Absolutely adore him, to the point that when the process wrapped up, I locked eyes with him when we finished closing. I was like, you do second time home buyers, right? Like I'm going to come knock on your door in a couple years. And so she introduced me to him. We had a phone call, and this poor man, I put him through the ringer. I'm like more type A than I probably need to be. Right. I
think that's a lot of DC.
There's something about the city that really attracts that personality. And I mean, I asked him question after question after question. And we were scheduled for a 30-minute conversation. I think it was over an hour.
Wow.
Just asking him questions, getting to know him, sharing what I was looking for, and really making sure it was like a good fit, that I felt comfortable taking. It's almost like a marriage, taking that next step with Blake. Yeah.
Right. No, and it does. It becomes an intimate relationship,
very much
just
so.
Based on the amount of time that you're going to spend together. them knowing so much about what you're looking for, your finances, your must-have lists. So it is very important who you work with. And so it sounds like you got really lucky and that you guys were just like a great match from the beginning.
Yes, definitely.
And you do feel like working with that team specifically gave you a leg up?
Ooh, that's a good question. So Blake, I was really privileged to work with Blake. He had worked in so many different aspects of the buying process that he knew the ins and outs before he even was a realtor.
Okay.
And he and my dear friend from the gym, Kellyanne Foster, shout out, had worked on a number of transactions together. And so they already had a cadence that they could trust to, bring about the success of this transaction. And so I learned through working with him to really trust his expertise. And yes, always advocate, do your own research your lenders, research insurance, title, all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, there is something to be said for trusting those who, this is their job and they have a network and they know how to use it.
Right. Yeah. No, and I think the network is key. And we talked about this in the last podcast. It's like relationships make a huge difference in this industry.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's something people normally think about. They're like, oh, like everybody's, they're all licensed. They're all kind of the same. But no, really, like if there are people with more experience, with more relationships, and that does really make a difference, I think.
Yeah.
And it's really great to hear that in your first meeting that you just went ahead and laid all your cards on the table and was just like, here are the million questions that I have.
Yeah.
And there's no such thing as a dumb question. Because I think a lot of people go into this process and they don't know anything. I mean, this isn't something like we should learn about this in school, but we
100%.
don't. Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that having the confidence to go into that conversation and just be like, I don't know what I'm doing and I need a guide. I think is kind of the best way to start the relationship.
Yes.
Because then there isn't that murkiness of I think I know what I'm doing, but maybe I don't.
And it's like finding someone that can break down complex topics for a general audience. And again, shout out to Blake, do so in a way that, I needed him to repeat things to me because I knew that I needed to understand it to take the next step with the lender, with the title agency, et cetera. Right.
Right.
And so, he very patiently, you don't even feel him using patience, but, finding someone that, you're working with someone that's good with first-time home buyers when they don't make you feel dumb.
Yes.
Right? And they give you that room to ask those questions and you ask them to repeat themselves because you need to understand that concept.
Yes. Yes. So once you kind of got an understanding of what you were looking for, then when you started to go see actual places, were there moments where you were like, wait, I thought this was going to be what I wanted, but it actually isn't? Like, was there a learning curve after seeing places in person?
Yes.
Okay.
And so there were places that Blake and I saw together. And there was also, he invited me to, on my own, go to open houses, keep him up to date, what I thought about them, how that impacted or didn't impact my list, if I wanted to put in an offer. And doing that kind of homework on my own really helped challenge my list. And so I'd go to an open house and I'd text like, you know what, actually, this part on my list is not a need to have.
Interesting.
I don't need to have the unit that's the highest or close to not a bottom floor unit. And that's actually one of the things that came off my list. And, now I'm on a first floor unit and I love it.
Yeah.
And so it was challenging those notions, asking those questions, walking around, seeing if I could transition my life and, the systems by which you live your life into this space.
Yeah. I think that it's fascinating how much people's wants do change once they see places. Because I know, like, going through Zillow, you see places and you're like, yeah, that seems like it'd be really great. But then you go and see it and it's not what you thought at all. Like between like the wide lenses that they're using to photograph things, and then all of a sudden you like look around a corner and you're like, whoa, like what's that? Like big vacant lot. So there's like all these things that the way things are marketed, it's so important to go and see them for yourself.
Definitely.
So tell me your initial wish list and then where you ended up.
Great question.
Yeah, you might need to pull out the notes.
Yeah, for this one. So I'll just scroll to find it. I mean,
you always knew you wanted a condo.
I always knew I wanted a 1-bedroom.
Okay.
And I think my list started how most people's first time home buyers list start.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, fireplace mantle would be amazing.
Yes.
I want AC. I want in-unit washer dryer. I want all these things.
Yes.
And eventually distilled down to 1 bedroom, a bathtub. I'm a bubble bath girly, a dishwasher, and being able to look outside and see trees, see some greenery. Those were what was most important to me,
right,
for the life I wanted to live.
Yeah. So your list dwindled.
It definitely did.
Yes.
Yeah.
But even though you had to sort of make sacrifices in terms of the kind of amenities that you had, that you wanted, at the end of the day, you're still extremely happy with your purchase.
Oh my God, it had everything and more.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's interesting, that I think it's hard for people sometimes to enter into this journey and feel like you've worked so hard, you've saved for so long, and you say, like, I feel like I deserve these things.
Yeah.
But in actuality, like, you have to be realistic.
Yeah.
And this market is just so insane. And it's okay to not get everything you want on your wish list. And it might even turn out for the better.
Yeah. On the the flip side of this, not having an in-unit washer dryer means that I don't have to worry about that leaking and breaking.
That's a good point.
In my unit, and waking up to a flood.
Yes.
Right. Perfectly content to go to the building's basement. Totally fine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that once you're in that situation and you start just going to the basement, you're like, oh, this is no big deal.
Exactly.
So I feel like so much of the home buying process is so mental. Yeah. And trying to find that common ground between what's realistic, what you can afford, what are your must-haves, and it's a very tricky process, I think.
Yeah.
So you started seeing some open houses. Your agent started taking you around a little bit. Do you have like an idea of how many places you saw?
I went to, on my own, I think maybe 6 open houses, as a serious buyer. And funny enough, I think Blake and I only went to 2.
Oh wow.
We were gonna go to 3. That's a whole other story.
Okay.
But yeah, he sent me a picture after we closed, and he has this bulletin board, and he had all these notes for his different clients, and then mine was this long.
No way. Oh my gosh.
Because I kept refining and texting him and all these things, and all the things I was looking for, he kept it right there. So when he brought me to a place, it really was, it had the features I was looking for. It was an older building, right? Elements, that were important to me.
Yeah. And I think that people don't realize that as an agent, like how on call you are all the time.
Yeah.
Juggling different clients, juggling their different wish lists. And it's just funny that your notes was so long, but hey, it's the type A personality, and you gotta get what you gotta get.
Yep.
When it comes to neighborhoods, were you pretty concentrated in one, or were you kind of open?
I was pretty open. I was pretty spread across Northwest, right? The DuPont, Calorama, Admo.
Yeah.
And then I had some neighborhoods that I was maybe iffy on because I hadn't had previous experience living there yet. Columbia Heights, Woodley. And then I ended up I now live in one of those neighborhoods. Yeah. And I adore it.
Yeah. And I think that that's another thing when it comes to your wish list, that you think you want certain things, but then when you go and see it, you're like, oh, actually, maybe I don't need those things. And I do think it's super important to be open to other neighborhoods and explore, because you might end up somewhere that you really love.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's good advice.
Really opened my eyes.
Okay. So I feel like at this point in your journey, you're looking at places, but then tell me about the day that you found the place you ultimately bought.
Oh my gosh. So Blake had there's a portal, right? Where I can flag places that I'm interested in. He flags places that he thinks I'm interested in. I had my eye on this top floor corner unit co-op that I had like blinders on.
Yeah.
Right. And there was a moment when, Blake was trying to show me other places and I was just not having it.
Yeah.
I saw so much potential in this place. And so he keeps putting, different properties in the portal. But he side texts me. It was like, I'll never forget, it was like 10 a.m. And it was like in the morning, he side texts me and he's like, hey, I just put this property, links it, in the portal. I really think you should take a look at this. Like that one specifically. And I was like,
yeah.
Okay, we'll see.
Yeah.
And I open it, instant. That first picture, I was like, oh my God, I have to see this place in person.
Wow.
And as you said, these wide camera, like these wide lenses
Yeah.
on these cameras, how spacious is it really? Is it, what are they hiding in the corners? And so we go and see it in person, and just walking around, getting a sense for it, I started to develop this feeling in my gut, and I really saw myself living there.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so you want it.
I want it.
I
want it bad.
Okay. And what happens next? Because I think that there are a lot of people who might be listening who've never gone through a real estate transaction who literally have no idea what comes next.
Yeah.
So what do you do?
Oh my gosh. Well, in this case, Blake pulls out his big folder of information that has this property and other properties that are comparable to it.
Okay.
So he's showing me essentially the data behind this. Is this unit priced appropriately? Would we put in an offer? If I wanted to put in an offer, which I very much said, yes, I want to put in an offer,
Yes.
right? That's the next step. Do we go do we go under? Do we go over? Do we go in at the listing price, right?
Was this unit new to the market?
Brand new.
Okay.
Yeah. It was the
Good
first
context.
to see it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Pros about getting in during this market. There's not a lot of competition.
That's good.
And, I think one big piece that I took away from this as a first-time home buyer is that if I had waited for the market to quote unquote cool down, I would have faced a lot more competition, and I probably wouldn't have gotten as great of a place as I did.
That's so good.
So going back to that financial piece, it's, also figuring out, yes, okay, I'll have a higher interest rate for a period of time, but if and when the market cools down, I can refinance, right? And so that was also a big piece there. But yeah.
Do you feel like, given the higher interest rates, then probably you have less purchasing power, so you were probably looking at condos at maybe at a different price point to start off with? Was that frustrating at all?
I think initially
Yeah.
it was, and it gets back to that notion around mentally, you're constantly negotiating within yourself, right? There's aspects within, the amenities within the unit, within the building, if you're not looking at a single family home. And, at the same time, I'm coming in as a first-time home buyer, not really knowing where I sit, right? I thought I could afford in this certain range. Turns out I was able to afford in a different range, which both open and closed doors. And so as a first-time home buyer, it was more so getting educated for the first time rather than having a strong stance that I just, couldn't shake.
Yes. Yeah. So you definitely fall in the camp of I'm happier having bought now with rates being higher, even though my purchasing power is lower because the competition was less.
Yes.
Okay.
1,000%.
1,000%. Because if you were to have entered this journey 2 years ago, you would have been able to afford more, but it would have been crazy chaotic. And who knows, you might have overpaid. For what you were
or
getting.
someone could come in all cash and I'm just, I can't hold a candle to that.
Right. Okay. So that's very encouraging to hear. That this time might not be a bad time based on how you look at it.
Yeah.
Okay. So you want to make the offer and you've gone over comps. And so did you decide to go list, over list, below?
We went at listing.
At listing. Okay.
Very well priced.
Okay.
And put in an offer that day. Is this where I
the
tell
day
this?
you saw it? Yes.
Is this where I tell the story? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say there was one hold up in putting an offer that day.
Okay.
The listing agent, I don't want to get anyone in trouble for this.
No,
Here's
it's
here's
not
the
gonna be
villain in our
traceable.
story.
Yeah. Let's hear it.
Okay. So the listing agent was a little MIA.
Okay.
So they had a really motivated seller. They had a really motivated buyer. The listing agent was on vacation in Spain.
Of course.
Listen, I am all for work-life boundaries.
Yeah.
Don't take your computer when you're on vacation. Yeah. They did not take their computer with them on vacation. They were gone for 2 weeks, right? So like poor Blake is like texting them, trying to get information. Because we needed to corroborate the condo fees. That was there was different numbers in different places, and so needing to know where it was when it last was increased to really know if I could afford this unit. And so the listing agent was overseas on this vacation. They didn't have any backups in place. And so it was kind of dripping getting information, but after confirming the condo fees, immediately put in an offer.
Okay.
And thankfully negotiations weren't tense.
That's
right. She was motivated to sell. I fell in love with the place. I was motivated to buy. The only thing we negotiated on was the EMD.
Okay. Which is earnest money deposit.
Yes.
So that's traditionally a small percentage of the purchase price, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think I'd done maybe 1%. And, she was really invested in selling. And so she was looking for something a little bit higher. And if I had backed out of the transaction without the contingencies, then, I would have foregone that money. But as we know, I didn't. And so it went towards my down payment. So I was perfectly happy having a higher EMD to show that I was truly invested as a buyer.
Yes. So having that higher EMD showed you were serious as a buyer and also gave the seller more security.
Yes.
Seeing like, okay, this person's willing to put down more money. And so they must be really serious about it. I feel like people don't talk about the earnest money deposit that much. Like,
I had never heard of it until I was in it. Yeah.
Right. So that's one of the things that was surprising to you in the transaction when all of a sudden they were like, okay, your offer's been accepted. Now you need to write this large check for an earnest money deposit.
Yeah, first of a few large checks. I was like, whew, okay.
Yeah. So, I think realizing having that money set aside at the beginning is something that people don't realize.
Because I was on a timer. I had to get that from the bank to the title agency in like 3 days.
Yes. Yeah. And so if you have to liquidate some investments or something like that, all that stuff has to happen very quickly.
Yes.
That's good to know. Okay. So your offer is accepted. You put your earnest money deposit down. And then next step, did you have any contingencies in place in your contract?
It's a good question. I ended up deciding not to do an inspection.
Okay.
So we waived that, which I think is fairly common in DC, because in DC, sellers are required to disclose any issues with the property. In contrast, like in Virginia, they don't have to.
Right.
Part of the
And I think with condos too, it's a little bit easier. You don't feel as uneasy waiving that. Is your building older or newer?
Yeah, it's an older building, 1936, but she had done a lot of work, brand new kitchen, new hardwood floors, new windows. So was feeling pretty confident and instead had the seller buy a home warranty.
Oh,
for the first year.
Okay. So the sellers paid, as part of your contract, you had them pay for a home warranty that then you now have access to for a year in case anything breaks.
Yes.
That's a very good compromise.
Yeah.
And because I think that, when things were really hot and there were multiple offers on so many things, everybody was waiving inspections just because you had to.
Yeah.
Just to even, have an opportunity to sit at the table. Where I feel like the way that you approached it was really smart, that you waived your inspection, but that sneaky little warranty clause, that's a really good idea. And I think that a lot of people will enjoy hearing that, to know that there is a little bit of a safety net.
Yeah. And I think that comes back to just working with the right people who know the process and can pull different levers and suggest different approaches for what you're
Yes.
comfortable with.
Totally. And the timing. I
And the
don't
timing.
think 2 years from now you could never have snuck in
Yeah.
a clause like that. Like they'd be like, no way.
Yeah.
So you waived your inspection. Did you have a condo document review period?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh my God. I went cross-eyed reading hundreds of pages,
Yes.
looking at all of the policies, procedures for the condo.
Yeah.
Had a financial contingency as well.
Yep.
Thankfully didn't need it, obviously. Yeah, those were the biggest components.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people don't realize that too about when buying a condo versus a single family home is that you do have that condo contingency where you can submit your offer can be accepted, and then you can have that contingency where I need like 3 days or something to review all the condo documents.
Yes.
And if I see something I don't like, it could be anything.
Yeah.
Then you have the opportunity to pull back your offer,
Yes.
walk away, and not lose any money, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think when I first learned that, I was like, I'm just gonna be making offers everywhere. Like, okay, doesn't seem like that big of a deal now.
Yeah, because you're also like buying into a community, right? You want to
Yes.
know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
And so was also something that I learned in this process as a first-time home buyer as well. Yeah.
Okay, so you didn't find anything wrong with the condo docs. You're
Yeah.
good there. You got your warranty set up. You do your financial contingency.
Yeah.
So that was, I don't know, maybe like 3 weeks or something from the time you submitted your offer. You had 3 weeks to make sure the bank, like, that you're good for the loan, basically.
Yes.
Okay. And so once that was waived, then did you close in like about a week or so?
Yeah.
Okay.
1 week from when the financial contingency ended.
Yes.
Exactly.
So it's like really the process from when you submit your offer and it's accepted. It's like a 30-day process, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quick.
It's both quick and long. I like there were so many moments where I was like, can we be done now? In the sense that I just wanted to get in there and nest and make it my own. And knowing that all of these other pieces needed to come in place, like the appraisal. That was something I didn't also know that I needed to budget for. So it took that off the top, right? So the whole time I have what I have for the down payment. I have the gift from my parents, but needing to set aside moving funds, right? You don't want to just purchase a place and then not have a way to get there.
Yes.
Right. And a fee for paying the appraisal, the appraiser.
Yes.
So,
yes. So did you feel like throughout the process that there were more sort of hidden's not the right word, but like surprise fees and costs that you weren't anticipating?
Yeah. I mean, you hear so much down payment.
Yes.
It's like, okay, I've got that covered.
Right.
I'm ready.
Yeah.
Right. Coming to this financial readiness piece. And then, oh, okay. My down payment is now a little bit less than I thought that it was because I need to pay for closing costs right. I need to pay for the appraisal and I need to pay for moving.
And closing costs, were they about 3%? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I remember having that conversation with like a couple first-time home buyers where you don't have to do the 20% down, right? So like, what's the minimum amount of cash that you really need to purchase? And so I think it's 3 or 3.5% down is the minimum. I can never remember if it's 3 or 3.5, but
I think it's 3.
I think it's 3. Okay. So 3% for a down payment, and then you need about another 3 for closing costs.
Yep.
And then I would budget another at least 1% for like you were saying, the appraisal fees, like that sort of stuff, inspection fees, things that come up. So like really the bare minimum is 7%. Yeah. That's where you could maybe make it work. Yeah. So I try to keep that number in my head, that it's not, 20%, it's 7. Okay. So you have waived all your contingencies or your contingencies have been lifted. Yes. And you're ready to go to the closing table. Yeah. So what was being at the closing table like?
Okay. So to prepare for this, remember like thinking about Camp 1 as much as I can up front to get my monthly down. Camp 2, what's 7% being the minimum, and my monthly is what it is, right? So being in Camp 1, I learned about points. Yeah.
Say more.
Points honestly ended up saving me, I I think over 100 a month in monthly payments.
Okay.
So points is basically a mechanism that you can use to buy a percentage of the listing value, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
1 point is 1% of the listing value,
Mhm.
and you can buy a point, you can buy 2 points, you can buy half a point, fractions, right? To get your mortgage down, to
Mhm.
get your loan down, to get your interest rate down.
Mhm.
And so maybe I don't have enough for 20% down,
Mhm.
but I have enough for, let's say, 15% and a point and a half.
Interesting.
And so that really helped me, again, being in this like camp one of trying to get my monthly as low as possible, make that work for my
Mhm.
finances.
Yeah. So again, going into this process, you had never heard of points before.
Not once.
Right. But as you go through it, you learn all these tricks. So I feel like you've learned so many tricks like in the month between the warranty,
Yeah.
the points thing.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there was one other thing too.
Oh, with the PMI.
And the PMI.
The PMI.
Yes, yes. So it's just crazy like going through this. And so that's why I'm hoping like to continue to have conversations like this, because there are little things that you wouldn't know unless you were in the process.
Yeah.
Unless somebody talks about it.
100%.
Okay. So you're at the closing table and the points, did the points conversation come up at the closing table?
No, they were in preparation to get there. Yeah.
So the actual closing table, what was that like? You just went in and you just signed a bunch of papers.
Right. I was the belle of the ball. It was great. Yeah. All eyes on me.
Yeah.
So closing table consisted of my sweet dear parents.
That's so nice that they came. That's really awesome.
They were a big part of the process. You know, baby of the family.
Yeah.
Wanted them to be included. My realtor, my lender. I don't think the lender always comes, but they were there as well. And then essentially like the lawyer that's putting all the paperwork together, and that puts a piece of paper in front of you and says, sign this. And in 5 seconds or less explains what that piece of paper is, takes it away, puts the next one. So you're signing your name maybe 100 times, right, in a span of 15, 20 minutes, and getting all this information about like, this means that, you know, this isn't fraud. Great. This means that, you know, you promised to pay. Love it. This means, right. And so it was, you know, taking care of all those signatures, and then I was handed the keys.
You did it.
I did it.
So great. Okay. So tell me now, just speaking more generally, what was the hardest part of the process?
Patience.
Yeah.
But I also think, you know, coming back to this idea of not having had this experience before, you know, I was provided good visuals and flowcharts of like, you know, these are the general steps in the process. Okay, great. I can visualize where I am. But within those steps, there's all these, you know, sub steps. And I think the hardest part was at times, you know, there's a lack of transparency. And I think that's just part of just the way the business is conducted in this sector. And so it's like, okay, I signed this form and I submitted this document, and I know that the lender is doing these things or doing things. And I know that the title agency and transaction coordinator are doing other things. I just don't know what those are. And I don't know where we are in the process until someone comes and tells me we're now at this step, right? Which is typically, at least in my experience, like my realtor. And so that was the part that was hardest, was just not having like insights and being able to, again, being a type A girly, pull up like a project plan and seeing, you know, who's responsible for what and where everything is.
Yes.
To everyone else's credit, you know, people were very transparent in communication, but there wasn't, you know, just one place that I could go to see it all.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the hardest part was patience and transparency.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The easiest or most fun part?
You know, it's daydreaming about your new place. You're putting together, you know, like a little shopping list, like what's going to be my present to myself for buying. And, you know, just visualizing what that new leg of life is going to look like.
I like that. Any other big surprises? I feel like we kind of talked about not realizing, points or
Yeah.
earnest money deposit, things like that were a surprise. An MIA listing agent, that's a surprise.
That was a surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But was there anything else that you were like, wow, this process, maybe this is the question. Was the process what you expected it to be?
Ooh, no.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I said no like a question.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
And I'm not sharing this to deter anyone from buying. I'm sharing this because I simply did not know. When the lender first started working with me, they provided estimates. Everyone's estimating what costs are.
Yeah.
We estimate it's going to be X and it's going to fall in a range between T to Z, right? So it could be anywhere there to help prepare you for what your budget, what the big fat check you're going to write at the end of it.
Right.
And so it's not until 3 days before closing that I really got the true number. And I think that connects to this aspect around transparency, right? To just know, like, what's it going to be? And that's when I knew 3 days before closing, I was like, ooh, can we buy a half point? What's that going to do?
Yeah.
It's going to bring my interest rate down to this. It's going to bring my monthly payment down to this, right? And, it was something that we had to figure out that day. He was like, this is what you need to bring to the table for closing. And this is your loan amount. And I said, can we make an adjustment? He said, we have to make an adjustment right now. Okay. Wow. And I worked with a great lender. We were talking on the phone and I was just like, I'm sorry. I need to pivot from phone to like a video call and I need you to screen share and I need you to walk me through these numbers because I need to get this right.
Yeah. And that's great that you advocated for yourself in that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's so many people involved in the transaction and everybody's kind of giving you an estimate along the way, but it's not until the very end, once everybody knows exactly what their piece is going to be, that you get that final number. So it is very crazy that it's 3 days before you close that you know exactly what you're going to be
for
paying.
The biggest financial purchase, surprise.
Right, right. I know, and it's crazy that you've spent very minimal time in the condo you ended up buying.
Yeah. Maybe 20 minutes getting to see it in person and then deciding.
Right. So it's like you spend 20 minutes looking at it and then you have 3 days to really figure out how much it's going to cost. Like that's wild.
Yep. Maybe even an afternoon. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So now you're in your place. You started making your payments yet or not quite?
Not yet.
Yeah.
So I closed October 10th and this is where working with Blake was a dream. Again, he knew so much about the process and the ins and outs that he was like, okay, you get to pick your closing date. I recommend picking, I cannot tell you why. He was like, it's too complicated to explain. I was like, I trust you.
Yeah.
He's like, if you pick a closing date the 8th or later, aka not October 7th, you don't have to make a mortgage payment in the month of November. It starts December. And I said, great.
Yes.
Let's do that.
Great. Yeah.
Right. So still kind of in that honeymoon phase where I'm like, I haven't paid my mortgage payment.
Right. I live here and it's great.
Yeah.
So once those payments do kick in, do you feel like you're going to have to make adjustments to your life to maintain those payments?
I already have. I've already started.
Okay.
Right. So, I pulled up my little budget, pulled up my credit card statement. I was like, where are we spending? Right. We've been a little flexible the last couple months. It's been okay. And so, transportation was a big one for me personally. Those like Uber and Lyft scooters are so easy. And so I got my own little scooter, which honestly has been, it goes like twice as fast.
Yeah.
So very efficient.
Yeah.
So that's reduced a lot. And then, being in the city, there are great restaurants here. I'm a big foodie. Can't say no to a good restaurant, a good time. And so, purchased this giant Pyrex set to meal prep and, freeze food and things like that now that I have a freezer that's big enough to have these meals. And so it's making like lifestyle adjustments here and there. And then, just taking a critical eye to subscriptions.
Yes.
And reducing those, knowing I can get those back in time if I really miss them. my salary increases throughout my career.
Yeah.
It's not the end all be all. It's just right now my finances are, again, in this box in the sky. And it's going to be like that for a little bit.
Right.
And then my life will continue to progress and I'll make adjustments.
Right. No, and I think that's a great way to look at it. And going back to your comment of, you know, everybody that's buying right now, the majority of them are getting help, and the majority of people buying right now are stretching.
Yes.
And that to think that people are just buying and not making adjustments to their lifestyle and not having to save and all that, like, that's unrealistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people need to not put so much pressure on
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, any final thoughts about the process?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Would you encourage others if they've been thinking about buying to go ahead and do it? You glad you did it?
When I first started, there was this question I was asked around condos or co-ops. And I was educated a bit around what the differences between those are. You know, a co-op, you're buying into a share of a collectively owned property. In contrast, a condo, your name is on the deed.
Right.
And that didn't have a lot of sway for me in the beginning of this process. And in fact, I was head over heels for a co-op for a bit. And I think it's just about, you know, figuring out what your values are. And if you're comfortable with, you know, having that share as a portion of an owner and the restrictions that can come with that at times, right? You know, not necessarily having as much autonomy to maybe rent the place out down the line. You know, the upside is not having to budget for your property taxes that in DC are March and September, because that's all part of your co-op fees. In a condo, I also have to set aside a little bit of that as well. And so I think it's just about, at the end of the day, finding people that you trust. And for me, that was just being transparent with my community about where I was in this process so that I could enlist the help of professionals that do this day in and day out. Right. And really cultivate a relationship with them, one of trust, so that, you know, when I do have my blinders on for a co-op, you know, I can be nudged in a direction that's beneficial to me. And I can take advantage of the relationships that these professionals have established in their career.
Yes. Yeah. Do you want to give any more shout outs to your team?
Ooh, yes. I mean, I've talked about Blake. Blake Hardesty, incredible.
Yeah.
Would work with him again in a heartbeat. My dear friend at the gym that I mentioned, Kellyanne Foster with KVS Title.
Nice.
So it made it very easy to pick the group. And then the other thing with co-ops is a lot of national lenders don't do loans for co-ops. Right. And so when I started my journey, I went with and still with the Caliber Home Loans because they do both co-ops and condos. Oh, interesting. And they're one of the few local lenders that that also do co-ops. And so it's shout out to them as well because Matt and his team were just really patient and really great breaking things down. So thank you.
Yeah. Okay, we're just about at time. Any other things we need to cover?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, you did such a good job.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're so well spoken. You explained everything so well.
Thank you.
So I'm so glad it was like fresh in your mind.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that I still remember some like timetables and stuff from real estate. Because I'm like, is it 3 days? Is it 21 days?
Yeah. This was so fun. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.
I really enjoyed just sharing my story, sharing my journey, and you know, it's something that I wish that I had to help push me. Right. To know it's not as scary as it sounds. There's people to help you, and there are tips and tricks when you're working with the right people.
Yeah. Great soundbite.
Thanks for listening to Keyed In with your hosts, Max and Brent, unlocking the minds of the industry's top real estate professionals. For more information on selling your home, find us online at keyedinpodcast.com. Remember to subscribe to Keyed In on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at Keyed In Podcast, at Rabin Max, and at Brent E. Jackson. And follow Max on TikTok at MaxwellRabin_properties.